Encyclopedia Brown. Everyone's favorite boy detective. Len's Hand. By Donald J. Sobel. 1. The Case of the Runaway Elephant. Across the length and breadth of America, people were wondering, what is Idavil's secret? For more than a year now, no one had gotten away with a crime in Idaville. Aside from being a model of law and order, Idaville was a lovely seaside town. It had clean beaches and 3 movie theaters. It had churches, a synagogue, 4 banks, and 2 delicatessens. The chief of police was Mr. Brown. He knew that nearly every American thought he was the best peace officer in the nation. He also knew the truth about Idaville. The real brains behind Idaville's war on crime was his only child, 10-year-old Encyclopedia. Whenever Chief Brown had a mystery he could not solve, he put his emergency plan into action. He went home to dinner. At the table he told Encyclopedia the facts. The boy detective solved the case before dessert. Once in a while, however, he had to ask for second helpings to gain more time. Chief Brown hated keeping his son's ability a secret. He felt Congress should award Encyclopedia a vote of thanks. But how could he suggest it? Who would believe that the guiding hand behind Idaville's police record could make a yo-yo loop-the-loop off a man on the flying trapeze? No one. So Chief Brown said nothing. Encyclopedia never let slip a word about the help he gave his father. He did not want to seem different from other 5th graders. But he was stuck with his nickname. Only his parents and teachers called him by his right name, Leroy. Everyone else in Idaville called him Encyclopedia. An encyclopedia is a book or set of books filled with facts from A to Z. Encyclopedia had read so many books he was really more like a library. You might say he was the only library in which the information desk was on the top floor. One evening Chief Brown looked up from his soup. Friday the 13th, he muttered. You're mistaken, dear, said Mrs. Brown. Today is Friday the 12th. I'm talking about 17 years ago, said Chief Brown. Does the date have something to do with the case? Asked Encyclopedia. Yes, with Mr. Hunt's elephant, Jimbo, answered Chief Brown. The animal is causing a problem. Encyclopedia refused to believe his ears. Jimbo was the only pet elephant in Idaville. He never caused anyone a problem. Mr. Hunt kept him in the backyard. If Jimbo is in the middle of a mystery, tell Leroy, urged Mrs. Brown. It could be his biggest case. Chief Brown nodded. It turns out that Jimbo may not belong to Mr. Hunt after all, he began. Mr. Hunt found him outside his bedroom window on April Fool's Day 17 years ago. What a shock for him, exclaimed Mrs. Brown. I imagine so, replied Chief Brown. Mr. Hunt opened his eyes, and there was Limbo peeping through the window. He woke up Mrs. Hunt to make sure he wasn't dreaming. What did she say? Asked Encyclopedia. I hope he's on a leash, replied Chief Brown, according to Mr. Hunt. Mr. Hunt has a great memory, marveled Encyclopedia. So does Mr. Zippes, said Chief Brown. He came to my office today. He says he owns the elephant and wants him back. He claims Mr. Hunt never paid for Jimbo. What does Mr. Hunt say? Inquired Mrs. Brown. Mr. Hunt insists that he mailed the money to Mr. Zippes, said Chief Brown. He waited while Mrs. Brown cleared the soup bowls. When she had served the ham loaf, he took his notebook from his breast pocket. I spoke with both Mr. Zippes and Mr. Hunt today, he said. I'll give you Mr. Hunt's side first. Encyclopedia and his mother listened as Chief Brown read from his notes. Mr. Hunt says that he thought the elephant in his backyard was a prank, since it was April Fool's Day. He immediately called the police. It turned out that the elephant had run away from a little circus which had just arrived in town. An hour later Mr. Zippas came to Mr. Hunt's house. Mr. Zippas owned and trained Jimbo. By then the Hunts had taken a liking to the animal. They asked Mr. Zippas if he would sell him. Mr. Zippas agreed. He also agreed to stay at the Hunt's house a week or two. The couple wanted to learn how to care for Jimbo. Mr. Kip-Paw, however, asked to see their money first. So that afternoon Mr. Hunt drew the cash from the Oceanside Bank and showed it to the animal trainer. After nearly 2 weeks, the Hunts felt they could handle the friendly Jimbo. Mr. Hunt offered Mr. Zippas the money. Mr. Zippas wouldn't take it because it was Friday the 13th, which he said was bad luck for him. The same night Mr. Zippas left Idaho. He left a forwarding address, and Mr. Hunt mailed him the money. Chief Brown looked up from his notebook. "That's Mr. Hunt's story," he said. "Mr. Zippas insists he never got the money. The address was his sister's house in New Jersey. He says she was sick and had telephoned him to come and be with her." Why did Mr. Zippas wait 17 years before coming back to Idaho to claim limbo? Asked Encyclopedia. It doesn't sound right. He says his sister died shortly after he reached her bedside, replied Chief Brown. A day after her death, he got an offer of a job in India. He's been overseas all this time. He only returned to the United States 5 days ago. "I wonder about him," said Mrs. Brown. "Why did he ask to see Mr. Hunt's money that very first day? I don't think that was nice. He should have trusted Mr. Hunt." "Mr. Zippas says he didn't ask to see the money," answered Chief Brown. "He says Mr. Hunt never went to the bank. Furthermore, the only reason he stayed so long with the Hunts was that every day Mr. Hunt promised to pay him the following day." Chief Brown closed his notebook. "I should add," he said, "that Mr. Zippas denies that he refused the money on Friday the 13th because it was bad luck. He says the only thing Mr. Hunt gave him were promises to pay." "What about the bank?" said Mrs. Brown. "Don't banks keep records?" "A hurricane struck later that year," said Chief Brown. "It flooded the Oceanside Bank, Mr. Hunt's home, and most of the buildings in Idaho. All the records were destroyed." "I still don't understand something," said Mrs. Brown. "Mr. Zippas worked in the circus. How could he take nearly 2 weeks off to stay with the Hunts?" "Mr. Kip-Paw told me that he had become tired of circus life," said Chief Brown. "By selling Jimbo, he could quit and open his own business." "Whom to believe?" sighed Mrs. Brown. She had risen to clear the dishes and bring in the dessert. She glanced at Encyclopedia with concern. He always solved a case before dessert. Was this case too hard? The boy detective closed his eyes. He always closed his eyes when he did his deepest thinking. Suddenly his eyes opened. "Dad," he said. "Both men have memories like an elephant. But the one who is lying is Mr. Who?" The case of the worn-out sayings. During the summer, Encyclopedia ran a detective agency in his garage. He wanted to help the children of the neighborhood. Every morning he hung out his sign. Thursday morning he received a telephone call from Max Corrigan. Max was 10 and needed help. Encyclopedia biked to the corner of Maple and Main Streets, where Max sat glumly behind a table full of books. Above him was a beach umbrella on which was written, "All kinds of information say to 154. "I'm quitting this corner," announced Max. "It's too dangerous." Just then a car pulled up. A man got out. "How do I get to Tigertail Drive?" he asked. Max opened a map and pointed to the street. "That will be 5 cents," he said. Have you got any more questions, mister? I've always wanted to know where the Latissimus dorsi is, the man said very seriously. Max searched through his books, cookbooks, almanacs, a handbook of chemistry, Roget's Thesaurus, and finally an old copy of Gray's Anatomy. It's this muscle, he said, pointing to a picture. The man smiled and gave him a quarter. As he drove off, Encyclopedia urged Max not to move his business. Half your trade is in finding streets for lost drivers, said the boy detective. This is the best spot for miles. Then I'll sell the business to you, said Max. The knowledge in these books is priceless. But for you, Encyclopedia, $3. Suddenly Max lifted his hand to his head in shock at his own words. $3? Such a deal! I don't believe it myself, he gasped. I already have a business, Encyclopedia reminded him. Now what's so dangerous about this corner? Worn-out sayings, answered Max. You'll understand. You're bright as a button, not to mention smart as a whip. Huh? Max explained. His Uncle Bob had sent him a newspaper from Alaska. The newspaper was holding a contest to see what reader could enter the most worn-out sayings, like flat as a pancake and high as a kite. I cut the story about the contest from page 31, said Max. I wrote Alaska Times, page 31 on it in block print. Then I read the rest of the newspaper. I'm missing the point, said Encyclopedia. There's more, said Max. I laid the clipping about the contest on this table. I was reading the last page of the newspaper when Bugs Meany came by. Bugs! I might have known he was mixed up in this, said Encyclopedia. Bugs was the leader of a gang of tough older boys called the Tigers. Encyclopedia was kept busy stopping their crooked doings. Only last week Bugs had filled a glass bowl with water and hung a sign on it, Invisible Fish. $2 a pair. Little kids watched for air bubbles and shouted, There's one. Encyclopedia said, Bugs stole the clipping about the contest? And the newspaper, said Max. I want to hire you to get back the clipping. Without it, I don't know where to send my list of worn-out sayings. Okay, agreed Encyclopedia. We'll go and see Bugs. Not me, said Max. Bugs is tough as nails, and I've got a thing about living. Be brave as a lion and cool as a cucumber, said Encyclopedia. I've handled Bugs before. The Tiger's clubhouse was an unused tool shed behind Mr. Sweeney's auto body shop. Bugs was alone when the two boys arrived. The newspaper story about the contest was tacked to a wall. Encyclopedia wished Max had not used block printing to write the page and name of the newspaper on it. All block printing looked alike. You stole my clipping, accused Max. There it is on the wall, as big as life. Stole? Bugs hollered at Max. You're crazy as a bedbug. I bought the newspaper from you. Bugs spread his hands as though asking to be judged from above. I've lived all my life clean as a whistle and good as gold. And you never paid for anything you could steal, said Encyclopedia. You're tight as a drum and crooked as a dog's hind leg. What would you want with a newspaper from Alaska anyway? I didn't know it was from Alaska until after I bought it, said Bugs. I saw this kid reading the last page with the story of the contest on it. I wanted the story. I cut it out, marked the page, and tacked it on the wall. Us Tigers are going to win $500. I'd be interested in knowing how, snapped Max. You're dumb as an ox. Is that so? Growled Bugs. When I hit you, you'll lose interest all the way down to the floor. Me and my big mouth, Max muttered. I'm leaving, quiet as a mouse and quick as lightning. You're not going anyplace till we get what we came for, said Encyclopedia. The boy detective turned to Bugs. You stole Max's newspaper and clipping, he said. And that is clear as day. What made Encyclopedia so sure? 3. The Case of the Skunk Ape. Bugs Meany had one dream in life. It was to get even with Encyclopedia. Bugs hated being outsmarted all the time. He dreamed of punching Encyclopedia in the mouth so hard that his eyes would be looking for his teeth. But Bugs never threw a punch. Whenever he felt like it, he remembered Encyclopedia's junior partner, Sally Kimball. Sally was not merely the prettiest girl in the 5th grade. She had done what no boy under 12 had thought was possible. She had knocked Bugs Meany goofy. Whenever they fought, Bugs ended on the ground, mumbling about the price of yo-yos in China. Because of Sally, Bugs had quit bullying the boy detective. He never stopped trying to get revenge, however. I don't know whom Bugs hates more, you or me, Encyclopedia told Sally. He'll never live down the lickings you gave him. Before Sally could answer, Gus Sarmiento rushed into the detective agency. His mouth was open wide enough to swallow a watermelon sideways. Gus was Idaville's leading boy cello player. Actually, he had first started learning to play the violin. Because of his flat feet, he had switched to the cello. The violin was smaller, but the cello was played sitting down. I saw it, he wailed at the detectives. The skunk ape. It reached into my bedroom window. The skunk ape was Idaville's abominable snowman, a creature supposedly half man and half ape. I don't believe in skunk apes, said Sally. Did you smell it? I smelled the carpet, answered Gus. I was so scared I fell on my face. He let out a moan at the memory. A hairy arm reached in and grabbed my empty cello case, he said. Ha, said Sally. A musical skunk ape. This I want to see. Encyclopedia wished Sally weren't always so brave. But he dared not show a yellow streak. He followed her and Gus to Gus's house. I was practicing on the cello when I saw the arm, said Gus. I always practice. Between 2 and 3 o'clock. His voice trailed off. He had halted outside his bedroom window. In a spot of soft earth was a huge footprint. Encyclopedia's scalp twitched. This is my most hair-raising experience since I pulled off my turtleneck sweater, he joked weakly. I smell a rat, not a skunk ape, said Sally. Doesn't Wilma Hutton live near here? 3 houses down the block, answered Gus. She's Bugs Meany's cousin, said Sally. And she plays the cello. Without another word, the 3 children headed for Wilma's house. Look, said Gus, pointing. A cello case lay among some trees at the side of the garage. As Gus lifted the case, a car came up the driveway. Wilma Hutton jumped out. She hurried toward the house, taking tripping little steps because of her tight skirt. All the while she screamed, "Police! Police!" The front door swung open. Out charged Bugs Meany. Behind him was Officer Carlson. "There's your skunk ape, officer," cried Wilma. As I drove up, those kids were putting the costume in that cello case. That's a dirty lie, exclaimed Sally. Better open the case, Gus, said Officer Carlson. Gus laid the cello case on the ground and opened it. Inside was an ape costume. The smell made him stagger. What died in there? Gagged Bugs. Your brain, snapped Sally. This is a frame-up. Bugs clenched his fists and snarled, May a giant clam bite you on the nose. May a sandbag fall on your head, retorted Sally. Cool it, you too, said Officer Carlson. Bugs reported that the skunk ape has been frightening his cousin Wilma for days. so I came over to watch for it. Wilma can't take much more, Bugs said to the policeman. She's an artist on the cello. Artists are very high-strung and nervous. That's why they picked on her. Oh, that's rich, said Sally. She's 17 and a date with Frankenstein would be laughs. You're just trying to get even, Bugs meanie. They knew Wilma's parents are off in Europe, went on Bugs. Poor girl, she's all alone in this big house. A shock like seeing a skunk ape can ruin her career. What about mine? Howled Gus. Officer Carlson waved his hand as a sign for the children to be quiet. We can get to the bottom of this. Is that your cello case, Gus? It looks like mine, replied Gus. But a lot of cases look like mine. Well, it certainly isn't mine, declared Wilma. She went to her car and opened the trunk. She lifted out a cello case. I've been in Glen City playing the cello, she said. When I arrived home, I saw these kids among the trees with the skunk ape costume. When they saw me, they shoved it into the cello case fast. Wilma and Bugs are in this together, Sally whispered angrily to Encyclopedia. I wish I could prove it. You don't have to, replied Encyclopedia. I can. What was the clue? 4. The case of the counterfeit bill. Armand Jenks was 8 and loved birds. He thought they were nicer than people. When school let out for the summer, Armand spent his time in the woods. He hardly ever talked. He chirped. The morning he came into the Brown Detective Agency, however, he wasn't chirping. He was holding a bird's nest. The devil has won, he announced. Birds are acting like humans money crazy. He laid the nest on the table in front of Encyclopedia. Woven into the line